everyone, welcome to Wandering DMs. I'm Paul.
And I'm Dan. On today's episode of Wandering DMs, we're going to be talking about Encumbrance. Should you use Encumbrance in your D&D game? What version of the rule should you use? How much are you willing for it to burden down your game? All that and more today on Wandering DMs. So, Paul, why are we doing this today?
Excellent. It's been a long time coming. Exit Sanity says it's worth the wait.
Yeah, slow burn on my part.
Why are we doing this? Well, I mean, the fact is that Dan and I have been working on another project which requires us to create a whole bunch of 5th edition characters. So we've been working on building all these characters, and issue of Encumbrance came up and we started discussing it. And interestingly, Encumbrance is one of the few things where you and I still disagree. Right?
Yeah.
Right? We have this joke, right, of how like you started with OD&D and I started with BX, and we house ruled and house ruled and house ruled them, and they've kind of come towards almost this same singular rule set.
Right.
But Encumbrance is definitely one of those ones. Even when I run OD&D and use the OED added convention game, I will point out I don't use the Encumbrance system on here.
Yeah. It's not completely the only thing, but it is the thing that's come up the most between us.
Correct.
So I'll say that as we were cooperating on developing these pre-generated characters for the upcoming project, it got sufficiently contentious that along about Thursday night, I was like, I'm not sure this is even a good idea for a show, because I'm personally pretty sensitive about this.
We did have to do a check-in and say, are we going to be able to talk about this on the stream without hurting each other's feelings?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we can handle it.
And good for us and good for Paul for doing that check-in. I personally really appreciate it. It was the right thing to do. And I say, yes, now I feel comfortable. I feel good and intrigued myself.
All right, so I think we should start with a thing that actually you and I both agree that is a good place to start, which is the golden rule, right? This is based on some text that Gary Gygax wrote at the beginning of the DMG, the first edition DMG, which I think you wrote an excellent blog post about, Dan, where you kind of removed all the double negatives and whatnot and boiled it down to this. The highest degree of realism has been attempted, so long as it does not interfere with the flow of the game. I think I think that's a really valuable statement of sort of intent or vision of how to build rules. And the interesting thing I think about Encumbrance is, man, does Encumbrance walk the razor's edge of this rule for me.
So well put. I couldn't agree more. And it is right on this razor edge, razor tipped fence. Position of it is uncomfortable. I don't think that it was properly set up in original D&D or first edition D&D, and so I have opinions about how it could have been made better. And the other thing is, I mean, this is a rule at the time where, I mean, I feel there was some amount of observation of the real world. There was some amount of we're looking at the real world and using that to inform at least the mundane parts of our game. And admittedly, if someone now was to say that, the game is just entirely fantastical and entirely cartoonish at all times, we don't care about any realism at any point, then this isn't going to get much traction. Someone's not going to care so much about it. But for many of us wanting the mundane parts to be reasonable and not surprising when people step into D&D, then for me, this has been very, very useful in solving a bunch of game design decisions that I've had over the years.
I feel like it's like, again, just to point at the golden rule, right? It's I really like you especially have written several blog posts where you examine like real world examples of D&D tropes to see if they work or not. Like I'm thinking of like your lantern oil post, and and I can see, and probably will, even in this discussion today, do a fair amount of that when we talk about Encumbrance. But at some point, following that literal sense of how it works in the real world will tip us into interfering with the flow of the game. And like finding out.
I think a lot of Encumbrance will do that. Yep, I agree. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
great.
And so blog posts like that of like, and back when I was doing video games and I was working on the NASCAR racing video game, and I was tasked with making a spotter that talked to you on the radio, and I was like, how am I going to do that? I'm not actually an expert in racing, and the solution was just go find out and actually find out what the spotter actually really says to them. And so I got some audio tracks of actual spotters on the radio talking to racers, and that's what I did. That's what I put in the game, and that just instantly solved all my problems. And it was solid, and it was really useful to avoid accidents, and it sounded halfway reasonable. And so taking an opportunity to look at how the real world works gives you a solid rule that kind of feels right and has worked for me a lot of the time. But yes, encumbrance is straddling a line, and it's hard to dial in.
Awesome. So let's start with the history. Or should we go edition by edition and sort of look at how encumbrance rules worked? And
I'm happy with that.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, great. So here I believe we have the encumbrance or the weight chart, or sort of both boiled into one maybe, from OED.
Right.
Not OED, sorry, original OD&D.
Yeah, original D&D, Volume 1, 1974. And so you can see like the first line there is the weight of a person, okay? And then the next three lines are actually your encumbrance limits for the three different move categories. And then everything after that is the weight of individual items that you're gonna add up and then compare to one of either line 2, 3, or 4 to see how fast you move. So the one thing, if those of you who are original D&D or first edition players, that the units involved are in gold pieces or in gold piece coins. So all of these things are. Right. All these things are in pounds times 10. So if you take those numbers, you divide them by 10, then you get pounds.
That is a fascinating thing for me because I'm very used to that from BX, but I don't think until doing this research did I realize that really originated in OD&D.
Yeah.
So that's really fascinating. Shall we dig into that now, or do you want to wait until BX? Because I have a lot of thoughts on coin weight.
Up to you, Paul. Wherever you feel that feels right. And I mean, that's not my only critique of this. And you can see, so the primary action is go get treasure. The treasure is probably in coins. That's the immediate facing page is all. If I'm correct, the immediate facing page is all the equipment list in gold piece, currency. So I guess maybe it was on your mind as you just happened to write these two pages one after the other, so that's what was on their mind, I guess.
Yeah. So that's very interesting that you're doing it in coins, and I get the impulse to do that, right? Because a lot of times when encumbrance really comes up, right, the most common place where it comes up is we've just gone through the dungeon, we found this great treasure. How do we get it out of here, right? That's typically where it becomes a pinch point, right? Oh, geez, and then some DMs will, myself included, will toy with the players a little bit by giving them very weighty, difficult to move treasures.
Absolutely.
Classic is like a chest full of copper pieces.
Well, there you go. That's the classic eternal gag starting with Gary of like, here's a giant load of copper pieces that with very little value, but now you're dealing with, and that happened in my campaign. That happened in my campaign a while back. Of here's a giant vault of copper pieces. How are you going to do that in the wilderness? And there was actually I thought a fairly interesting moment where we're going to pitch all of our food and we're going to try to fine tune how much food are we carrying versus how much copper can we carry on the week-long trip back to base before we start this. I will point out, like in this table, right, all of the units places are all zeros. So it's not, it's like if you turn it into pounds, there's not a single thing here that's like 25. So you wouldn't lose any accuracy here at all if you just divided it all by 10 and called it pounds.
Yep. I mean, it's worth noting that at the bottom of the page where this table appears, it gives some other weights of other things. And the first item on there is 1 coin, 1. Also, interestingly, 1 gem costs 1. But those are the two things that even bother with the ones digit, right? And then everything else is a multiple of 10. Yeah.
You're right. Some treasure stuff below that I snipped out. Yeah.
The other thing that blows my mind about this table is that last line. not the last line, second to last line there.
Yeah.
Miscellaneous equipment, rope, spikes, bags, etc. 80.
Right.
So all the other stuff, like we're giving you, here's explicit weights of all your armor, all your weapons, every piece, every coin of treasure you're carrying. But the other stuff, it weighs 8 pounds, don't worry about it.
Right. And on the one hand, that seems like a nice, easy abstraction. But on the other hand, I know that you, Paul, maybe we'll talk about this later, you, Paul, have run into problems with players in your games around issues like that. And I think maybe Gary did too, because when you switch to first edition, which we don't have as an image, but when you switch to first edition, that goes away. And he's got specific encumbrance for every single rope, spike, bag separately.
I think I did pull an image of first edition. Maybe.
Oh, did you?
No. I think I did not. I did look at first edition this morning. I do have the table for third. Anyway.
In first edition, way at the back of the DM's guide, it's in an appendix. It's weird. It's not in the player's book. It's way at the back of the DM's guide in an appendix, and he details every single separate thing, plus an example of 2 characters carrying stuff around, and guess what? Having to drop a bag of extra heavy stuff in order to run away from a troll.
That's first edition. I'm all over the map, but okay, let me tell you about some interesting things I noticed about first edition. As you know from my history,
stuff in your head.
Yeah. No, not even in my head, right? I got a whole page of notes on this thing. Okay, here we go. First edition. Here's the interesting thing about first edition. My history is I owned the basic BX set and just the player's handbook for a very long time. I did not own the Dungeon Master's Guide until an adult. What is and is not in the player's handbook is super weird.
Yes.
So, my inclination when I'm researching first edition stuff is the first thing I reach for, just out of habit, is the player's handbook. And it's bizarre what's in there. You do get weights of some things, but not others. You get weights of weapons, but not armor. You get some weights are referred to in gold, in coins. Some are in pounds with the pound symbol at the end. And it's not consistent.
What is in pounds? Give me an example of something that's in pounds, actually.
I believe like limits, like how much you can carry. 35 pounds, 70 pounds, 105 pounds. And the funny thing is, in first edition, there's several cases where they actually use, the pound, the number sign, the pound symbol, which has got to be the only use case I've ever seen in a printed material of that actually used in that way.
Interesting.
Although I've always called that symbol pound, right? I mean, the telephone company says press pound to do whatever.
Yeah.
But I think that's the only case I've ever seen that.
I feel like that's one of those cases of like the design, like that's where Gary really would have benefited from like an equally empowered editor in that moment, because the OD&D is a lot more not coherent, but coherent in a particular design sense, that all the way through he did the same thing. And then as you go to first edition, there tends to be like a bifurcation of did he copy forward stuff from OD&D? Did he edit it? And those decisions were different in different places. So you wind up with this kind of like slightly schizophrenic system in first edition sometimes around that. And I think one of the things that you don't see in the player's handbook, for example, are like attack tables, right? And so at me starting off with first edition, I was like, okay, the attack tables, the mechanisms are hidden in the DM's guide. I get it. It's in the control of the DM. That sort of makes sense to me. And actually, one of the really weird things for me when I actually got my hands on OD&D in like 2008 is I was shocked that the attack tables were in the player's book, and I was like, oh my god, the attack tables actually were presented to the players in the initial iteration in its first edition, where they were trying to yank them away. And I'm like, wow, what a weird one-off decision that was. And plus a whole bunch of like where the weights are for things, as you're saying here.
Yeah, it's inconsistent, I guess. I don't know. The more I read it now, later in life, and looking at those books, the more I feel like the player's handbook is like the Cliff Notes of the Dungeon Master Guide, right? And like some stuff made it and some stuff didn't. Yeah. And I really want there to have been like a really solid plan for what made it in and what didn't, but I'm not convinced that's the case.
Right. The other thing is, there was a lot of time between those things because they were only coming out once a year. So the Monster Manual came out in '77, the Player's Handbook came out in '78, and the DM's Guide came out at the end of '79. So there's actually a whole year between Player's Handbook and DM's Guide. And when I read it, sometimes I go like, the game itself has actually evolved, and he's changing rules. And there's a bunch of stuff in the DM's Guide that to me counts as errata or changes from the Player's Handbook in that year of evolution.
All right. We're tangenting off of Encumbrance here. I'm going to bring us back to that. So let's quickly jump to BX, because that's I feel like the missing link between OD&D and first edition here. Here's our page from BX. By the way, that picture in the upper left of the guy with the sack and the coins falling out is like just one of my favorite pieces of artwork.
Me too, right? It's by Errol Otis, right? 1980, and I love that. I mean, I love the Jeff D illustration on the bottom right too. And at some point, I was actually like using that as illustration practice. Like I was trying to duplicate that when I was like 11 or 12. And my dad comes by and makes some kind of salty comment, but the Errol Otis art at the top left is really delightful.
It just shouts encumbrance rules to me. Like that's like, oh, here is an illustration about encumbrance rules. Okay, great.
And it's very old school that it's like, we're not happy. The guy is not happy. He's not like, oh, look at, he's not like, I'm such a golden child. Look at me. He's like, my life is terrible. My axe is cracked up. My helmet doesn't fit really great. The sack is splitting. Right? It's very super old school of like, this is tough. Like it's just a tough life.
Okay, so here's some interesting facts about BX. One, we're still in coin weights and still 10 coins to the pound. We still are left with a miscellaneous of 8 pounds for all the other stuff, right? BX also doesn't specify. You get weights for every weapon and every piece of armor and every piece of treasure, but everything else just gets lumped into 8 pounds. Here's an interesting fact, Dan. The numbers start to go down for weights of things like armor at this point, right? And that's an interesting thing I find really fascinating, because that's the other major point for me when we're talking about encumbrance. Besides how much treasure can I carry out, it's what is the impact of wearing heavy armor, right? This is where we see the impact of wearing heavy armor. So I'll point out in OD&D, if you look at your 3 major armors of leather, chainmail, plate mail, they weigh 250, 500, and 750 coins, respectively.
Right. So 25, 50, 75 pounds.
25, 50, 75 pounds. In BX, 200, 400, 500.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And then the other interesting thing to compare that to is, well, what are the limits? At what point does that start to weigh me down? Well, in OD&D, the first weight limit that starts to weigh you down is 750, the exact same weight as plate mail.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So you could wear plate mail and still move at 12 inches, provided you have absolutely nothing else.
Yeah. You're right.
In BX, your first weight cap is 400. You cannot wear plate mail and move at top speed. In BX, not possible.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah.
So
kind of
I
the same
like
flavor.
that.
Kind of the same flavor. Yeah, for that. Yeah. Now, one thing I'll point out is that in neither of these rules is there any modification for strength, right? So original D&D, BX, there's no these things are hard limits, and there's no modification for your strength ability as came into later editions.
Yep. Okay. Here's major disagreement number 1. I like that. Okay. I approve of that, and I would like to see that continue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not morally offended by it. I get it. I
understand. It's logical that higher strength would make you able to carry more, but there's so much riding on strength already. It's already affecting my to-hit bonus and my damage bonus. Are we really going to put one more game mechanic on top of it?
Yeah, that argument is not going to sway me.
No?
That's one whereby if somebody knows just hiking or carrying a rucksack in army training or something like that, they're going to know that different people can carry different amounts of stuff, and that's going to be that they're immediately going to start complaining about that. Of I have a big burly barbarian and they just carry the same amount of stuff as the halfling. That they're immediately going to be offended, and they're going to be morally offended, and they're going to be complaining about that immediately. So I would like some simple way of handling strength, and I'm not that bothered by the fact that there's an additional bonus to it. I don't think
we get this I think also segues us into another interesting problem, which is I think was hinted at the comments, but I've already lost. Sorry, commenters, I've already lost tabs of you guys. The notion that encumbrance, I mean, just boiling encumbrance down to just weight probably is not very good, right, or not accurate, right? Like there's a certain problem with just saying weight affects this, and we should talk about bulk and volume and balance and etc.
Yeah, it was Ash pointing that out. About 7 comments up on YouTube, at least. Bulkiness comes in the picture too, especially with bigger items. Yeah. However, that starts to become hard to actually gauge. And of course, Gary, so Gary in first edition, he totally writes these numbers are not just weight; they are also account for bulk. But I don't know if that's one of those his like he's defending himself against the modifications that Moldve made in BX.
I get wanting to do that though, right? Like as a game mechanic, as a game designer, I would like to be able to abstract it a little bit, to boil it down to just one number, to make it easy for you to track, because this is the problem ultimately. Here we go. Here's the guts of it. Here's my problem with encumbrance. Nothing quite takes an exciting adventure game and boils it down to tedious accountancy like tracking, encumbrance, and inventory. Right, like especially in OD&D in original games, like that is half your freaking character sheet is devoted to inventory. I've seen more games grind to a slow momentum because players then had to do a whole bunch of accountancy on their character sheet about what they're carrying and what the weights are and etc.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I feel that, and I've seen that go bad, and I try to have a light touch in my games. Just on the point of bulk, I will say that if I'm gonna create a table of weights, right, it's easier from real sources. It's definitely easier to get data on weight than it is on bulk. So for the purposes of designing it, I don't mind the numbers being actual weight, because then it's easier to have a discussion and say, how much does plate mail actually weigh? Right, that's an easily answerable question, and I think that Moldve has it more correct right here. Whereas if it's like, how bulky is this, then there's no way to actually justify your side of the debate you're on. I'll say that.
I like that in BX we've tuned it in such a way by not accounting for strength and by setting the weight limits at and versus the armor weights as they are, that we accept that no one is moving at full speed in plate mail. That's just not possible. And I like that a lot, right? Because it accounts for a little bit for that bulkiness or awkwardness factor of being encased in steel, right? Which you're probably not running as fast. And I know there's a lot of research on that, and then we get into like the swimming, can you swim in plate mail and all that stuff. I get it.
Right. At this point, I've seen enough videos of people running in plate mail and climbing ladders in plate mail, basically, and actually having a sprint and keeping up with people that aren't in any armor at all, that I'm convinced that some fit people should be able to move around in plate mail without being slowed down. So I'm not, I'm not offended by having it slow people down, but on the other hand, like, you must be slowed down in plate mail at this point doesn't, on a realism basis doesn't sway me at this point.
Okay.
Have you seen those videos, like people having a race with people, like,
for sure. And I think that requires a bunch of training, and typically they only have the plate mail on. They don't have a bunch of other equipment, right? They're I feel like it's, a fair enough outlier that I would say your average adventurer, put them in plate mail, they're going to move slower. And I like that.
On average.
I like that abstraction. Yeah. So when we get to 5th, I'm going to be a fan of some of the specific things in encumbrance that key into armor, of which there are a couple.
So I agree with Ash that probably LARPers could comment on it more, but many of our understanding now is that plate armor was really not that limiting to movement or flexibility. But it's close. I mean, it should be. It's kind of, and so when I look, I think the current understanding is plate armor tended to be around 40 or 50 pounds, 40, 50, 60 pounds, something like that. Definitely not 150 or whatever he had it in OD&D. Yeah, yep. Definitely not 150.
So, by the way, numbers kept going down in first edition. In first edition, our weights for leather, chainmail, and plate are 15, 30, and 45. So they continue to plummet.
Okay.
Continue to plummet.
And I feel that might have been, I think those are close to real-world weights, I think.
I can tell you that my chainmail weighs about 20 pounds.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's probably... I don't have the leggings, so it's probably fair.
Yeah, I think probably someone came through.
Like the OD&D number of calling chainmail 50 pounds definitely feels a bit over to me.
Right. Now, I was just pointing out issues about heat. Right now, I'm gonna avoid going off on that tangent because I love that topic. Was I looking at that topic 48 hours ago? Yes, I was. But I'm gonna leave that for another episode.
Great. We'll talk about armor again later. But I still think, I guess my major point is, like, I feel like when we're talking about encumbrance that armor is a major balance point here. When we're talking about encumbrance, what usually one of the two big things that are going to push you over edges are armor and treasure.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Shall we go on a tirade now about coins? Let's talk about coins.
Oh shit.
Well, when we get away from first edition, we're going to stop talking about coins, right? So they stopped doing it, right?
Okay, that's a good point. Okay. So here's my pitch, if that's okay. So the coins that you're carrying are in original rules are unfortunately messed up in two separate ways, right? Two separate mutually aggravating ways. Number one, they made them way too much. So no coin has ever weighed 1/10 of a pound. And I guess if you didn't have one, and you didn't have research in front of you, you might go 10 per pound. I don't know, something like that. And you're about one order of magnitude off. They historically coins weighed like 10 times less than that. So they made them way too big, way too large, way too heavy. On the other hand, the economy, right? They made them buy too little. So no one has ever needed sacks of gold in order to buy a horse or a helmet or armor or things like that. So you put those two things together, and on a pound per unit value basis, the coins in original D&D that you take out are buying about 100 times less than you would in reality. So the amount of stuff you can buy for that sack that guy is carrying around right now is about 100 times off from reality. So among the very first things that I fix in my games are, one, make the coins weigh 10 times less, and B, make the equipment cost 10 times less. And then the stuff that you carry out is that even if it's copper or silver, can buy you reasonable amount of stuff. But the combination of that, the coins in original D&D were really messed up. And there's a side thing I could get into that I will leave for now.
It's probably, so it sounds like basically we agree on this point. I get there are some fans who like seeing encumbrance in coins because it is nice when you just say, well, how much does this sack of 27 coins weigh? It weighs 27. Done. Yep, I get it. I agree. I have some amusing photos here to share, so I'm just going to share them.
I don't even want to deal with the number 27. I mean, 27 itself is a sufficiently crappy number. I never want to deal with the number 27 ever, frankly.
Great. Okay. So here's some pictures from the British Museum in London. There's a lot of displays there of hoards that have been found, basically buried treasure, right? Coins underground. Metal detectorists in the UK love to dig this stuff up. There's a lot of them there. Unfortunately, there's not a good scale representation here, but these are pictures I personally took, so I can tell you when I was looking at all these coins, they're about the size of an American dime. That's about the size of them.
Exactly.
Alternately, I have these silly tokens. These are definitely for gaming that I bought that these feel kind of like, this should be like what a fantasy coin looks and feels like. That's heftier than a dime. Sure, but I can tell you it takes about 35 of them to get to 8 ounces, so maybe 70 for a pound.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's me holding those 35 in my hand, right?
Yep.
So, yeah. So I totally agree with you. We're off by a good factor of 10. Now, granted, someone's probably going to point out that gold is dense and heavy, and so maybe weighs more, per volume. But I still think I agree with you. We're off.
What you're saying actually exactly matches the research that I've done online. Actually, so the rule that I have in OED is 1,000 coins per stone. Yeah. And so if you do the division, it comes out to be 70. So it's actually what I found is actually 70 coins per pound, which is just exactly what you said basically.
I love the irony here, Dan. I guess we're going to talk about OED here, but I love the irony of how you don't want to deal with the number 27, but you're okay with the number 14.
But the 14 never actually comes up in play. It's a totally not, only when you're converting, right? And so this is similar to people complaining about metric versus English, but that number only comes up when you're converting. Here's the solution: don't convert. Just don't convert. Just put your mind in the other system, and then it's not an issue.
You want me to put up your OED rules here?
Might as well, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Great. So, viewers, I don't know if you can see how this can possibly ever become contentious.
I have a retort, but I want to hear what you got to say. So go ahead. And I think our viewers do too. So go for it.
So here's my OED encumbrance movement rules, right? Boiled down as much as I could possibly make them. So my observation is that the fundamental mistake in original D&D was that the units are too small, and you need to deal with things like 27 or 55 or 150. And you can't add those. No one can add those things up without a calculator. Well, that's a mistake for a tabletop game. So I think that the units ought to be more granular, some larger number, at least pounds, right? The second thing is that I like to pick up some kind of archaic unit that's going to work well for me. And so what I picked up is the unit for weight known as a stone, which is more used for like UK people's weights now. Yes, a stone happens to be 14 pounds. That almost kind of doesn't matter. It's just that it's bigger. And the thing that if I am going to use strength, you can say the amount of stuff that you can carry maxed is out at your strength score. So if your strength is 12, the maximum you can possibly carry is about 12 stone. And those numbers seem to match up and seem to be pretty convenient for me. And that's what I use as a rule. So as you can see there, the item weight is plate mail, and I just looked it up, and yes, I divided by 14, but you don't need that in the game. So plate mail weighs about 4 stone, and chain mail weighs about 2 stone. Large weapons weigh about 1. And then yes, the one complication that I'm not 100% happy about is that you do have to go into fractions for smaller weapons. I do have to have there that light weapons or a helmet or a bow or a rope weigh 1/3 of a stone. Personally, when I count those up, I just go down the character sheet and go, how many light things are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Well, that's 2 stones, how I do that. Mm-hmm. And then the gradations of the movement are up to 1/3 your strength or 2/3 your strength. So if your strength is 12, you're unencumbered at 4 stone, and you're partly encumbered up to 8, and the max you can carry is 12 stone. And it works fairly well for my game. Now, I will say, look, I'm not happy about that fraction, right? That's actually the thing that does the least favorite thing. If there was a historical unit, and I've looked for it, that was 5 pounds, which is about 1/3 of a stone, I would have made this in that unit. I actually would have made this in units of 5 pounds each. But the attraction of the amount you can carry is your strength score was just too delightful and too beautiful a connection for me to avoid. So I was very happy to say your strength score, that's the number of units you can carry max. And that's how I do it in my OED original edition Delta house rules, which Paul does not use.
Yeah. So I've clearly given you enough crap about that 1/3 fraction that you're ready to defend it, or at least defend that argument, which I totally get. Yeah, well, dealing with a bunch of 1/3s, especially I think in deltas of I'm currently carrying how many, and I want to pick up this one more thing, and what's that? It's a third, and I currently have this many thirds. Annoying.
In game, I never during the progress of the game, I'd say ignore a third. I just say ignore it until you pick up a whole stone. So you pick up 1,000 coins, then you got to include that. But I never ever make anybody add in like a third of a thing when they're in mid game.
Excellent. Sounds like you have reasonable players.
I have had, I've had fewer complaints from any of my players than from you.
So, well,
I have had very good players.
And that's frankly, I'm thinking about this more from the DM's angle. And here's my next problem with it is the unit of a stone, which I find to be awkward because I can't mentally visualize it. I deal with pounds every day of my life. I know what a pound is. I know what 5 pounds is. I know what 10 pounds is, right? I buy groceries in those units. I can visualize what they're like. I can imagine it. So when I'm DMing and somebody picks up some random thing off the ground and says, how much does this weigh? I can go, oh, that's probably about a pound. Oh, that's probably about 5 pounds. That's probably about 10 pounds, whatever. Whereas if I had to do it in stones, I would have to go and do the math in my head. I would have to say, well, it's about 15 pounds. That's one stone, a little more than one stone.
I don't do that, right? I don't do that. So my only this is the standard complaint when anybody switches to another unit system, and this is why Americans are still not switching to metric because everybody levies that same criticism. But the only two things in my head are like, is it as big as a battle axe, or is it the size of a helmet? Right. That's more or less it. So it's either battle axe is one stone and a helmet's a third of a stone, and that's basically just what I'm comparing everything to all the time.
Okay. I feel like I would have to do a little bit of concentration and practice at that to get comfortable with it, right? So it just doesn't come naturally to me, which is another reason I just haven't bothered to pick it up. Another problem is that, I understand you're trying to adjust the scale, but what about the other end of the scale? What about, what's a candle weigh?
I don't care.
So 0.
Yeah.
Okay, and I have a huge problem with zero weight
I know.
Items. A huge problem.
Tell us about that problem.
The problem is there are some players who will then game that. So I specifically had a player who was like, great, candles weigh 0, I will take 50. And I said, really? 50? Well, they clearly weigh more than 0. So at what point do they start weighing 0?
Yep.
Right? And then I amusingly at that time then I toyed with him and I said, okay, great, well, how are you carrying 50 candles? Like, you're just carrying them loose? Like, that seems impossible. He's like, oh, I get a box. And I said, great, the box weighs 20 pounds. So there are certainly ways around that, but it might not be that obvious, right? What if I just am the type of character who picks up little odds and ends as we play, and the next time I, as DM, look at your character sheet and I see 50 things in your inventory list, and I go, really? You're carrying all that stuff? Oh, well, 40 of them weigh nothing.
And
obviously not.
And you
right?
had a player that you actually have had a player that did that, right? Like he actually picked one of like everything that didn't weigh anything at some point.
Oh, sure.
Basically.
I've had players, more than one, who have like a whole second sheet for their inventory, whole second page of full 8.5 by 11 paper, just for all the stuff they're carrying around.
Right. And I get that. Like, there's a lot of things that are on my mind because of players that I had like in high school that would like frankly cheat on a bunch of stuff, right? And so I have like things that I'm worried about that other DMs such as you go, I've never seen that in my life. I'm amazed that anybody ever had to concern themselves with that. Yep. So I understand why you've been burned once or twice with that issue. I don't know. Every time you bring that up, I think like, what would I do if I had to handle that? And Ash is saying, well, my rule of thumb is just anytime you get 10 of something, then that bumps it up to the next category. I guess
but
for
again,
me,
you got to be a hawk, right? As a DM, you've got to be on top of it. Then you got to know everybody's inventory and be watching it and go, oh, right. Like it would be way easier if just everybody was just reasonable, right? But the problem is, I don't think they're actively being malicious here, right? I don't think this is someone trying to cheat, right? They're just you know not thinking about it, right? They're just you know, these things are cool. I want my character to have these things. I write them down on my sheet because I certainly am very anal as a DM about if it's not on your character sheet, it doesn't exist. So write it down because I'm not keeping notes. I'm not keeping notes of every piece of inventory every character has. So yeah.
I wish that we could put this up to a survey actually, because there's a bunch of interesting comments in the comments. At the moment, and this is the hazy, rough territory of the encumbrance of how much you know. How often do you do accounting? How often do you double check the player's math? At some point, I think I had a note to myself to take my players' sheets and do an audit quarterly. I think it's actually what I had planned for myself. And, you know, and there were some mistakes, and there were some just honest, math mistakes occasionally, or, you know, things that they'd overlooked. You know, I want it to be, I do want it to be as lightweight as possible. And at some point, no matter where you set the granularity, something's going to come in underneath it.
Let me just say, nothing says fun adventure roleplay to me like the word audit.
Well, you know, mistakes happen. So, you know, sometimes, you know, even in your game last night, right? You were finding a mechanism to publicly show the ability score rules so that people could double check that. If I'm correct.
The ability. Sorry, I'm blanking. So you changed tracks on me too fast there.
You had people rolling ability scores on roll 20, so that people could look at them later in the chat, right?
Yep. Yeah, that was interesting. Just sort of like, I feel like I saw this conversation immediately echoed on Twitter, just totally randomly by other folks about whether you roll for stats or not, and then the notion of like, well, what about, you know, making sure that no one's cheating? And interesting thing that came up was that we had a roll 20 game set up, and so players on their own could just go in there to roll their stats, so it could be audited. People could go in and look at the chat log and say, yep, you rolled those numbers, without us all having to be online at the same time, which is interesting. Interesting way to do it. Not something I'd thought of, and Anyway,
let's look at 5th edition. Let's look at 5th edition.
Yes, let's talk about 5th edition because that's what started this whole thing, and it's really interesting. Honestly, it's really interesting. So
So, I mean, whenever 5th edition came out, I mean, I actually browsed through the books. What is it, like 2004 or something like that? It's 14. Oh my God, I'm in the wrong decade. Like 14 that's came out. And so I was browsing through the books, and it's something that's on my mind. And I actually specifically looked up, this is in the strength section, I specifically looked up how do they do encumbrance here. And then I didn't play 5th edition, so I forgot for a couple of years. But the default rule in the top 3 paragraphs is your carrying capacity, your max carrying capacity is your strength score multiplied by 15 in pounds. And then that's it. And then just no more detail than that. No more detail. So you can just carry up to 15 times your strength in pounds, and there's no reduction movement up to that number is the default rule.
There's a really interesting thing about 5th edition here in how sort of spread out the text is, and how like if you're just going with paper books, it's actually fairly difficult to track a lot of things down. I think because we've become so used to digital tools, right? A lot of people are using stuff like D&D Beyond, or even just a PDF where they can just quickly say, oh, keyword, copy, paste, search, find that, right? Noted by the fact that I was trying to look up these rules, and I went to the index in the back of the book, and I looked up encumbrance, and you know what it says under encumbrance? It says C, lifting and carrying.
Right.
Really?
I'll say this is in a weird place. I do not use digital tools most of the time. I still use paper books all the time, and it was hard for me to track this down myself when I needed it. This is actually weird, but I expected this to be in the movement section, and it's not. It's under the strength ability, which is, I thought, a weird place.
And as we talk about this, we're going to find actually that it's impacted by some other rules, of which are in different places in the book. So you have to do a lot of cross-referencing to dig up all the pieces.
Yeah.
But go on. I've interjected too much now. Continue about 5th edition.
So 15 is an interesting number, right? So I receive a lot of complaints about why 14. Why 14 is such a complicated number? Well, here in your fancy ass 5th edition rules is the number 15 times your strength, and then there's a variant encumbrance, which to me is like was standard encumbrance. The variant encumbrance is if you want gradated categories, you get 3 of them. And the first category is your strength up to 5 pounds, and the second category is your strength up to 10 pounds, and again it still maxes out at your strength times 15 pounds. Well, when I saw that in 2014, I'm like, well, that's basically the OED strength rule. It's just instead of using stones, which happen to be 14, they convert it to pounds and round it off. And so whereas where in my OED rules, I have 1/3 of a stone, 2/3 of a stone, 1 stone times your strength, this is the same rule, just converted and rounded off. So when I first saw that, I was like, I don't know if someone's actually been, and if it's the case, I'm flattered. I know at least one person at Wizards used to read my blog. So I don't know to what extent this was inspired, but it seems interesting and someone would come up with that 15 pounds times strength number that so closely matches. You could just say, hey, that's basically 1 stone, and then not have to deal with 15s running around. John's got who I'm thinking about there.
Here we go. So here's an interesting thing. Okay, so other things to point out. So when I am presented, actually, we skipped 3rd edition, but I guess that's fine.
Yeah.
When I looked at 3rd edition, which is also very strength, it's also just a table, though. Table based on strength. Here's your strength score. Here's your weight limits.
But it's exponentially based. It's an exponential multiplier instead of a linear multiplier like these other rules.
So in both 3rd and 5th, the first thing I did is I said, well, what's it like for somebody with an average strength, and what's it like for somebody with extremely high strength? So your 12 strength character can carry up to 180 pounds, and your 18 strength character can carry up to 270 pounds. And so then the next thing I want to compare that to is armor. What did the armors weigh? Okay, here it is. Leather armor is now only 10 pounds. It continues to plummet. 10 pounds.
Okay, interesting.
Plate mail, on the other hand, has gone up to 65 pounds. Very interesting.
Oh, really?
And chainmail is a little harder to track, because chainmail by the book weighs 55 pounds, which is the biggest it's ever been. But also, I will point out, 5th edition has categorized armor into light, medium, and heavy, and chainmail is technically a heavy armor.
Right.
So if you were trying to get one representative armor of each of those, I might look at the chain shirt instead of chainmail. Right. And the chain shirt weighs 20 pounds, which is a little bit more in line with stuff we've seen earlier.
Gotcha.
So if we're looking at the chain shirt, your major armor categories are 10, 20, 65.
Wacky. 65 seems high to me.
And then I want to poke into the fact that as I'm looking at this armor chart, there's this very interesting column about strength.
Right.
And that's something that threw us, I think, down this alley in the first place. What's the strength value? Does this mean I have to be this strong to wear this armor? The answer is no. You can wear the armor regardless of your strength. Yeah. Right. However, if you have less than that strength value, which I think is 13 for chain and 15 for plate, then your speed goes down by 10 feet per round. And by the way, don't use this if you're using the variant encumbrance rules. They specifically negate that and replace it with variant encumbrance.
It's on screen. It's the first paragraph under the variant last sentence there.
Yeah. So that's really interesting, and you gotta read carefully to grok all that, I think.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, for me, I kind of like this notion of we've boiled encumbrance down to just one number. You can carry up to this much, no more, no less.
Yeah.
and then we're going to change your movement rate based on the armor you're wearing, and then we're going to special case you out if you're super strong. I like the simplicity of that.
I can see why you say that. We like things that are simple. As someone's make things as simple as possible, but no simpler.
Yeah, yeah.
There's like Einstein or somebody said that. When I was, when we were working on the characters for this new show, and I came across one and I threw in just the standard gear to get started with, and some heavy armor and a big shield and stuff like that. And later on, I came across it, and this character's carrying 150 pounds, yep, and is not slowed down at all. I was like, well, that's just clearly wrong. And I think that anybody that does, like I say, like I feel in my like mundane things should work in a mundane fashion. And if someone does, hiking or backpacking or something like that, the standard rucksack in the Army to hike with is like maybe 40 or 50 or 60 pounds. And you can read a blog post on hiking, and someone says, I'm 6'2" and I weigh 225 pounds, and I would never carry more than 60 pounds with me. It's just infeasible. And so if someone who has any, that kind of awareness sees a character carrying 100 or 150 or 200 pounds of gear and isn't weighed down at all, that's just clearly just wrong.
See, it seems a little contrary to what we were talking about earlier in regards to plate mail, where you're saying plate mail, just like if plate mail weighs 65 pounds, surely it should slow everyone down regardless of strength, yes?
It's on the border. But I don't think it does weigh 60 pounds. In
5e, it does. 65 pounds. But
it's 50. I think when I did it, it's either 50 or 60 pounds. Yeah, I mean, it's on. It's on the border. It's on the border. Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you had roots,
you brought up starting equipment.
Yeah.
You brought up starting equipment, which is, I think, another very interesting factor in this, right? So this came up just last night in a game. I was starting a new 5th edition campaign, and one of the questions my players asked me is, what are we doing about starting equipment? Well, starting equipment in 5th edition is a little weird, right? It's a little different, and I think it's because they're trying to streamline it, right? They, like me, are saying there are certain elements of the game where it bogs down into accountancy, and we don't want to do that.
Right.
We want to make it easier, faster, and I feel like a lot of people have done this well, let's just give you a couple options. Here are a couple options you have for equipment. So in 5th edition, the standard rule, right, is to not roll money and individually buy each little item, but is rather to take, based on your class and your background, make choice, do you want A, B, or C? Boom, 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 boom.
Yep. Pretty cool.
And I have, I even have, now that I'm remembering, I think I have an image. Here we go. Here. Often included in that standard equipment is one of these packs. Here's a pack. You have an explorer's pack. You have a burglar's pack. What's in the explorer's pack? 10 days of rations, 10 torches, a bedroll, a backpack, a mess kit, a water skin.
Right.
Here's the thing. These things do not work with variant encumbrance well at all. If you're using variant encumbrance and you actually calculate out the encumbrance values of these packs, anyone carrying one of these is super weighed down.
Like what category are you talking about? You're talking about so of the 3 categories, you're talking the 3rd category or the 2nd category?
Oh, you mean are they heavily encumbered or... Well, frankly, first of all, I think there really are 4 categories, right? Because there's can't move at all, so overwhelmed, can't move at all, right? Slowed down a little, slowed down a lot, slowed down not at all, right? I haven't actually done all the math on these, but I think that nobody's unencumbered carrying this stuff, right? I think you're at least down into the slow down a little, probably slow down a lot.
Yeah. For the characters that we were making, I think they were all in the 2nd category.
The slow down a lot? Do you mean?
No, slow down, like encumbered, not heavily encumbered.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot of stuff. Now, I'm not saying your characters don't want all this stuff. They probably do. But they probably need to find a way to carry around this stuff without just putting it in a pack and carrying it around with them everywhere they go, right? This is the
well. I'm
by
not.
the point you're doing this, you want to talk about do I hire people? Do I get a mule?
Right.
Do I do we do a sort of group think here where we say, hey, strong guy, you carry more than your share of stuff because you're strong, right?
I mean, I'm not offended by people being slowed down a bit, and I think that, like a lot of the time, my D&D parties tend to be in the second possible category. So out of 12 inches, 9 inches, 6 inches, in my terminology, the party itself tends to be at the 9-inch category usually.
Sure. Yeah. But I would rather take the analysis paralysis out of that equation. I know plenty of players who are going to try and optimize their characters as much as they can, and therefore are going to be carefully looking at all the weights and trying to figure out how do I redistribute this, because I know there is a way for me to get unencumbered, right? Yeah. Whereas, again, if you have a system that just says, you're in plate, sorry, you're encumbered, end of story, I feel like that's so much easier. That's great. All then I need to know is, like, do I want the heaviest armor? Do I want the better AC? And if so, I'm going to have to deal with moving slower. Good. Done.
So instead of I'm not really offended by that trying to optimize it. I'm really not. I'm not that offended by. I think those are interesting choices.
I think that's where we start to fail the golden rule. I feel like that's where we start to say we are interrupting the flow of the game by doing.
I've never had. I get. I mean, obviously, that's a. I might come down on the other side of that, and it doesn't happen in game. It doesn't happen in the game. Like it's something that does happen.
Absolutely, happens right in the middle of the session for sure.
Doesn't happen for me in the middle of the session.
Oh, that does not happen to me many times. I think it comes down to what kind of players you're playing with, right, and how much they're worrying about tuning their character. Right. If you have a bunch of players who are like super excited to just do like a lot of role play, and you're just worried about the personality of their character, and they're just gonna whatever, okay, I move slow. If you say I move slow, fine, I don't care. Then it's probably not going to come up middle of the game. But I think there are a good number of players who are going to fall in the category of I don't want to be slowed down in the next combat. I need to fix this right now.
I'm not like, when would that come up? Like, give me, like, for you, when does that, like, what kind of situation
does that come up? It comes up during character
creation.
It comes up when we find treasure, when we find, new items. Oh, great, I can now afford plate mail because I couldn't afford it before. Now I can afford it.
Right.
Let me do some math.
Okay. Well, so what exactly do you, what do you do, if you're running a BX style game? I'm personally unclear on what you actually do now. So what do you do for encumbrance in your, like in a BX game?
I've run a BX game in some time now, but what I would do is I use the standard rule of not based on strength. It is weight charts. So I actually have on my blog, I have used Labyrinth Lord, which is a retro clone of BX, to extrapolate the equipment list and figure out weights of all the things. And so I have the weights of, I convert to pounds because I say it's not worth tracking in coins. We can just say, plus I want to fix that. I want to say it's 100 coins per pound, not 10. And so I use pounds, and I have a full list of here's all the weights of all the things. And I can snappily answer when somebody says, how much does this strange, silver statue that we found on the evil altar weigh? And I can go 2 pounds. And they will quickly just add it in, plunk it in, calculate the new total, and then look on the standard chart. Have I hit one of the major points, the 20, 40, 60? Sorry, no, is it 20, 40, 80? Weight limits where it starts to affect my movement.
Right. I will say, for what it's worth, if someone picks up a 2-pound statue in my game, I say, don't worry about it. I just say,
interesting.
I don't care. Don't worry about it. It's not, it's less than a third of a stone, so I don't care. For what it's worth. Now I will point out that
when do they worry about it? If they say, great,
it has to be a whole stone.
No.
It has to be a whole stone.
Here's my question. You told me, don't worry about that statue. I say, great, I write on my character sheet, one small statue.
Right. Yeah,
2 sessions later, I find another thing. Don't worry about that. Great, I put that in my pack. Eventually, at some point, right, I've got a big laundry list of all this weird stuff I'm carrying around.
I haven't crossed that border. It's never gotten to a point with any of my players, and I guess maybe I just got lucky. It's never crossed a point where that ever became an issue that came to bothering me, honestly. And even if I do check the sheets, occasionally it's just been bad math, like they just forgot to add in their chainmail or something like that. But even if I do double check the sheets of the characters in my campaign, I've never crossed that boundary of that.
If you're running a character for multi-year campaign, stuff's going to accumulate, man. Like, it's just like
we played for 2 years.
Life, man. I got a big house, and so I filled it with stuff. And why do I own all this stuff? I don't know. It fit, so I bought it, and now here I've got too much stuff at my house.
Yeah, it gets unloaded in the house. I mean, then the characters themselves, in my 2-year campaign, they bought a house and they started unloading stuff in the house.
So at some point they sat down and they looked at their inventory and they started saying, this stays in the house and this I'm taking with me and blah, 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 right? They did.
It was never tiny. It was never tiny 2-pound stuff. It was like this. Where do I put this $10,000? This 10,000 gold piece scepter? I mean, that's it. There was like 5. There was like, where do we put the 10,000 gold piece jewelry stuff today? Mm-hmm. And they came up with a place to hide it in their house, and they never.
So if I'm just gonna keep picking on this. Yeah. So if I'm playing in your campaign and I've accumulated a bunch of rando items that are in my pack because we've been down in the dungeon for a long time, and then we come across a giant treasure chest full of thousands of gold pieces. Right. Now do I have to do the accountancy?
Well, I will say this chest weighs 2 stone. Yep. Tell me how you're carrying that. And now we do actually have to have a discussion.
I scoop out the gold pieces and I fill my backpack. How much can I take?
Well, we'll look at then we'll look at your current encumbrance, and if you are a 12 strength character and you can be moderately encumbered up to 8 stone, and you're currently carrying 6 stone, I go, well, you can carry 2 stones worth of the coins.
Okay, so when you said we look at our character sheet, at that point, are you doing let's reevaluate and make sure your total is correct?
Just in increments of stone.
Yeah, but all the little things. How much? The dozen of little things that you said don't worry about. Am I counting those now?
No, just look whatever number is currently listed for how much stone you're carrying. So if it currently says 6 stone and now there's another 2 stone, are you okay or you're not okay?
Okay.
So I don't think in game I never deal with anything less than units of 1 whole stone.
Right.
So it's like, you tell me, can you carry another stone? Can you carry another 2 stone? If so, great. If not, now you're slowed down. You're going to have to give some of that to somebody else.
It seems like I don't know. It just strikes me as that there's a massive loophole in there that by gathering small items over time, I can carry way more than I should. And you're telling me you just don't care. Okay.
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it come up. You're of course you're right. You have to be right, right? All abstractions are leaky, so you've got to be right. But it hasn't. In game, I never deal with anything less than a whole stone unit.
Yeah.
So it's like can you carry a stone? Can you carry an extra 2 stone? Not be weighed down. Great, done. Yep. Less than that, I don't care.
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, we are.
One thing that I noticed. So one thing I noticed is that the BX rules, right? And I didn't remember this, frankly, because I don't look at the Moldvay BX rules. Is technically that page we're looking at is marked optional. So I mean, there's a default rule in BX which just looks. I think I'd have to look up the page, which just looks at the armor you're wearing and nothing else. So I guess before we wrap up, I got to ask, why aren't you using that rule, Paul, if that's your preference?
Oh, boy. I did not realize that was marked as optional. And so where is this other thing that tells me my movement based solely on my armor? Where's that?
I don't know. I couldn't.
I don't think that exists. I think you're making that up.
No, it's okay. So I know where it is in homes. Damn it! Someone in the comments, if you know where the movement by armor is.
Yeah.
Oh man, we might have to put it in the comments afterwards.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, honestly, if that rule exists, and I was running a BX game, and this is a lot of ifs, but I might be tempted to do it. Purely movement rate based on armor, and then you can carry stuff and don't worry about it. Yeah, why not? I'll give it a try.
Yeah, I think like I'll say Holmes has a table that says like I don't know, like carrying nothing, then you're at the top rate. Wearing leather armor or carrying some treasure, then you're at the second rate. Third rate is in chainmail or leather plus treasure, then you're at the third rate, is how Holmes does it. Now, what counts as treasure is a little...
So Ash has found it for us. It's on B20. Okay. 400 coins or less, or unarmored. Yeah, I guess even the or is like all caps or. Yeah, because the encumbrance bit is optional. So it's the same. It is that very page, right? Yeah.
It is that very page. Yeah.
Which we can look at.
And so the carrying treasure is only listed in the last category. So I'm thinking of Holmes where they had it in every single one. Yeah.
A player carrying treasure in addition to wearing armor must use the movement speed one line below the normal one. End of story. Just about treasure, not about how much. Interesting.
Yeah. So then now you're going to have, so no matter where you land on this, right, you're going to wind up having the same debate, Paul, about how much stuff is in this, like at what point do you start caring about how much treasure counts as treasure? And so no matter where...
And what is treasure, right? Like that quickly becomes a question. What is treasure anyway? Does this count as treasure? I intend to sell it. Right? If I killed a bunch of goblins and took all their swords with the hopes of selling it for money, is that treasure?
Right. See, in Holmes, what it says is like the categories are fully armored or carrying a heavy load. That's it. That's all you get. You decide what counts as carrying a heavy load, and then fully armored and carrying a heavy load. Then you're in the next category. So no matter where you slice it, you're gonna at some point there's some number that you're debating what comes underneath it, and it's like the classic. Now we know what you are. We're just debating the weight.
It's tough, man. Like there is no absolute right answer to this stuff, right? That's really the problem. I think that the 5th edition rules are a decent step. Disagree. And frankly, so we, like I said, I started a new 5e game last night. We debated this a bunch, and we opted to not use the variant encumbrance, which I am happy with. And that's how I think I will continue to run 5e for the moment, is not using variant encumbrance.
Okay. Interesting.
Now, the nice thing is, I think it combines this sort of BX thing that we're just talking about like it's just based on armor, and then also there's a cap, right? And I just want to in the 0 hour, let me throw one last wrinkle. A huge problem is how much we rely on digital tools now. Whether you're using D&D Beyond or Roll20 or whatever, most people are not really paying super close attention to this stuff, right? They're just saying, not most people, I shouldn't make that generalization. People who are using the digital tools are probably not super on top of every piece of equipment because they go, just add it and just tell me, system, what's my movement now? And when I see my movement go down, then I'll go back and audit and get rid of stuff if I must, but I'm relying on the underlying automated system to inform me rather than bothering to know all the nitty-gritty of the rules. And that's a problem because for a long time, like D&D Beyond, the default was to use variant encumbrance. They've changed that recently. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Really? So I think they changed the default selection in recent history, I believe.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say the thing that tricked me was the way that they had it labeled. So, I mean, they've got the default is labeled as standard encumbrance, and so I thought old school style standard meant all this older stuff we were talking about with gradated movement, and it doesn't. So when in the current interface, when it says standard encumbrance, it's like here's a limit and no modification up to that limit. So that's what confused me at least. Are you hearing me? Yeah.
Oh, geez. Sorry, Dad. We're getting a little over here, and I think the batteries in my headphones may be dying.
Oh, no. Oh, dear. Okay.
Hang on. I'm gonna switch it real quick to something else so I can hear what you're saying, because I can no longer hear you.
So while Paul is modifying his tech setup, I will say, as I think William pointed out, a totally another method that we actually have some images for, but we just didn't fit into the hour, is, of course, tracking items just by just raw number of items in slots. And, that's common in a lot of video games. Like for me, Diablo is the first thing that I think of. It's just like one item per slot, and you have maybe 12 slots or something like that. On the original D&D 74 forums, just in the last week, some people were thinking about, maybe have a sheet that specifically shows your pack, and you have a certain number of slots in the pack, and you have to list what you're carrying and actually where in the pack they are, which is kind of an interesting technique. Probably not something that I'm going to personally do, but there is a whole separate way of just don't worry about the weight, and you care only about just raw number of things and where you're carrying them. So if this hadn't been such a dense topic, we probably would have talked about that for 15 minutes or so.
So I can kind of hear you, Dan. I've got you on speaker, which is maybe going to unfortunately cause a little echo, so apologies, folks, if there's any echo coming into the audio now.
I think it's fine, Paul, actually.
You sound okay? Okay, great.
Yeah.
I wanted to point out that, Stay Frosty does this. So it's an old-school sci-fi setting game. They do a thing where the character sheet just has a number of boxes. I think it's like maybe 15 or 20 boxes. And then based on your strength, you cross out a certain number of boxes. And then just each of those boxes, you put a piece of equipment in. And I think they even have one or two pieces of equipment where they're like, this takes 2 boxes. And so you got to write, this piece of equipment in 2 boxes. But that's it. End of story. Right. Just how many boxes do I have? And I just write thing. Which I kind of like, honestly, right? Like, I don't know. I like an abstraction like that. Solves the candle problem, right? I can write 1 candle, I can write 20 candles, I can write a box full of candles, doesn't matter. 1 box.
We've been playing, so I've been playing in Max's game of Troika. I think that's how you're supposed to say it. You're going to say Troika, because there's an exclamation mark at the end. And so specifically for your pack, right, everybody's got a rucksack pack, and it can hold slots 2 through 12. And so you get to make a decision, which is obviously 11 slots. So you get to make a decision about where you put your stuff in slots 2 through 12. And if you need to grab something quickly in a particular round, you roll 2 dice. And if the dice come out greater than or equal to that particular slot, you manage to grab it. So you have to make some kind of, I kind of like that. So you have to make a decision about what are you putting in slots 2, 3, 4. And for like my particular character, it's my ammunition, my knife, stuff like that, versus, further down the pack where stuff that you're unlikely to have to grab like in a round of combat. So it was kind of clever. I don't mind that. I'm not going to use a slot system in my own game, but I can see why. Someone would do that.
Well, there you go. That's Encumbrance, Dan. I
guess
feel
I'll
like
just say
we're so over time now. We really should wrap it up.
We're going to have a debate about how many candles go in 1 slot.
4.
Right? How many candles go in 1 slot? Well, that's fine. Great. You get a decision. Wonderful. I support that. I support the number being 4. Great. Now you can wrap up. Now we finally answered that question. You can wrap up, Paul. Thank you. I'm relieved and satisfied. 4 candles per slide. Finally. Take it to the bank, people.
All right. That's our show. If you have some thoughts on Encumbrance, and I know you do, leave us some comments here in the video. Actually, I'm really curious to know of other interesting, maybe indie games that do it in a different way. Like we just started to touch on like slot systems, so other games out there that I'm not aware of maybe do really unusual, different stuff for Encumbrance. I'd love to know about it. Drop us a comment here in the video, please, and we'd like to read it.
We would, yeah, definitely. Now remember that, of course, you can like and follow and subscribe to us. If you want more stunning debates about Encumbrance in your inbox, you can follow us on YouTube and Twitter and Twitch and Facebook under the handle Wandering PMs.
Our shows are also available as audio-only podcasts. You can find those on our website at wanderingdms.com. You can also find them on various podcast distributors like iTunes and Google Podcast and Spotify. If you are listening to us on one of those carriers, please take a moment to rate and review us. We really appreciate it.
We definitely do. As usual, thanks to our patrons who support the show here and comment on a weekly basis. We really do appreciate that so much. If you would like to join our patrons, we would love it if you would visit patreon.com/wanderingdms. Now, remember that we have a number of shows through the week, and sometimes the schedule pops around, but look for our shows on Tuesday and Thursday, and hopefully this coming Saturday. We're live here every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And so, Paul, I'm looking at my schedule here, and I see that next week we have a guest, and this guest is R.A. Salvatore. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. R.A. Salvatore will be joining us next week. I'll also point out that next weekend is D&D Live. So I don't know if any of you folks are planning on watching D&D Live. I know I am. But that wraps up on Saturday, so just in time for you then to flip over to wanderingdms.com, catch our show, and listen to what author R.A. Salvatore has to say about playing D&D.
And of course, so R.A. Salvatore, of course, a big, long-time author of novels with the D&D brand attached to them, and the creator of course, a particular famous drow character. Just released a new book like last month. Is that right? If I recall correctly.
I'm sure he'll have plenty to say on our show on Sunday.
Great. And a longtime player, and Mr. Salvatore does still play D&D on a regular basis. So I'm personally looking really forward to hearing what he has to say about current D&D trends.
Yeah, maybe you can even get him to weigh in on the debate we were having last night about what encumbrance system to use, because of course he was in that game.
I hope that we do get him to weigh in on that, Paul. Well put. So look for our other shows and look for that next Sunday. We really hope that you'll join us for that and get your questions in, and we'll pitch them at Mr. Salvatore while he's here. Please do join us again next week for another thought-provoking discussion.
We'll see you then.